It was the sort of autumn morning England does best, mist coiling lazily around the hedgerows, the air smelling faintly of damp leaves and coal smoke, and the distant sound of a milk cart rattling along the lane. Inside the Beresfords' sitting room at the Laurels, a cheerful fire crackled despite the mild chill, and a pot of tea steamed companionably between husband and wife. Tuppence, in a cardigan the colour of clotted cream, had the Sutton Chronicle spread neatly on her lap. Tommy sat opposite her, half concealed behind the Times, legs comfortably stretched, exuding the air of a man who believed in peace after breakfast and was determined to protect it. "My dear Tommy," Tuppence said, stirring her tea thoughtfully, "have you ever noticed how the smallest things in country papers often mean the biggest trouble?" He murmured from behind his paper. She tapped the column. "Listen to this. Local girl missing. Lucy Hargreaves, employed at Mrs. Vale's drapery shop, failed to return home after delivering a parcel to the vicarage on Tuesday evening. Last seen cycling along Church Lane shortly after 8. Tommy gave a non-committal grunt. "Runaway, probably. They do, you know, these girls. Fall in love with a fellow from the bus depot, elope to London, and reappear 2 months later with a story about joining a troupe of dancers." Tuppence lowered the newspaper and regarded him with that mixture of amusement and exasperation which marriage refines into an art form. "You're becoming cynical, Thomas Beresford. Mark my words, there's something in this." He smiled faintly. "Darling, you think there's something in everything. I'd wager you could find a murder motive in the church flower rota." Before she could retort, the doorbell rang, a brisk, uncertain sound that carried through the quiet house. Albert, their long-suffering manservant, was out on errands. Tommy rose with a sigh of domestic martyrdom and went to answer it. A moment later, his voice sounded from the hall, unusually sober. "Tuppence, someone to see you." The woman who stepped into the sitting room was small and pale, her coat buttoned wrong, her gloved hands twisting a damp handkerchief. The mist had followed her indoors, clinging to her hair and eyelashes. "Mrs. Beresford?" she asked in a tremulous voice. "You're the lady who helps people sometimes, finds things out." Tuppence rose at once. "I suppose you could put it that way. Please sit down. You've had a shock, haven't you?" The woman sat gingerly on the edge of the chair. "It's my daughter, Lucy. She's gone. Vanished, they say. The police think she's run off, but she wouldn't. Not my Lucy. She's a good girl, never out late, never took a penny she didn't earn." Tommy poured her tea, his earlier indifference softening. "She worked at the draper's, didn't she?" "Yes, sir. Mrs. Vale's shop. Tuesday evening she was to deliver a parcel to Reverend Holt at the vicarage. Nothing unusual. She never came back. They said they'd found her satchel by the gate at the end of Church Lane, but no one ever saw the bicycle again." Tuppence's eyes sharpened. "And the parcel?" "No one knows. Reverend Holt says he never saw her. The police searched the vicarage grounds, but they're treating it as a missing person, not a crime. But I know. Something happened. Someone stopped her. There's talk she had a bit of extra money lately, and someone must have taken advantage." The woman's voice cracked. Tuppence reached across, taking her hand gently. "We'll do what we can, Mrs. Hargreaves. Tell me, who gave her the parcel?" "Mrs. Vale herself. Said it was for the vicar, same as always. Only this time Lucy told me she was to deliver it by hand, and not to anyone else. She laughed when she said it, but her eyes, there was something strange in them, as if she were frightened and didn't want me to notice." Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence. She said quietly, "You've spoken to the police, of course." "Yes. Inspector Craddock from Market Lacey, working with Scotland Yard, came yesterday. He was kind enough, but you could see what he thought. Just another girl gone to London for excitement. But Lucy isn't like that. She's shy, thoughtful. She wouldn't even know where to find excitement." "Sometimes," Tuppence murmured, "excitement finds you." The clock on the mantel chimed 11. Mrs. Hargreaves dabbed her eyes, murmured her thanks, and left as suddenly as she had come, leaving behind the faint scent of lavender and anxiety. For a while neither of the Beresfords spoke. Tommy returned to his chair and sat staring at the fire. Tuppence moved to the window, looking out across the garden where the mist hung low over the hedges. "Well," Tommy said at last, "I suppose you're going to tell me we can't possibly let it alone." "Of course not," she said briskly. "A girl vanishes in broad daylight, carrying a parcel no one will admit to receiving, and you think we should mind our own business? Really, Tommy," he sighed, You make it sound rather irresistible when you put it like that. Precisely. Sutton Lee isn't far, half an hour's drive. We'll start there. Before luncheon? Before luncheon, she confirmed, eyes alight. By the time they reached the village, the fog had lifted, revealing a cluster of cottages with red roofs and a single church spire pointing like a finger of accusation into the pale sky. The shop fronts were unremarkable. Post office, grocer, drapery. But Tuppence felt a shiver of anticipation as she read the faded sign over the door, Mrs. Vale's Drapery and Notions. Inside, the air smelled of starch and lavender polish. A tall, angular woman stood behind the counter, arranging ribbons. Her manner was brisk but not unfriendly. "Yes, sir, madam. Something for the house?" "Information, actually," said Tuppence with her most charming smile. "We're friends of Mrs. Hargreaves. We heard about Lucy's disappearance." The woman's hands froze on the ribbons. "A dreadful business," she said after a pause. "Poor girl. Such a capable worker, too. I only hope she's safe." "When did you last see her?" Tommy asked. "Tuesday evening. I gave her a parcel for the vicar. Books, nothing valuable. She left at 8. I waited for her to bring back the receipt, but she never returned. I told the police all that." "Did anyone else come into the shop that evening?" Tuppence inquired casually. Mrs. Vale hesitated. "No one unusual." Then, catching herself, she added, "Only Mr. Dennison from London. He calls for lace samples once a month. He was in earlier that afternoon, but he'd gone before Lucy left." "Mr. Dennison," repeated Tuppence thoughtfully. The woman busied herself behind the counter again. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I've work to do. It's no use stirring up more gossip. Poor Lucy's mother suffers enough." Outside, Tommy exhaled. "Well, that went swimmingly." "She's lying," said Tuppence promptly. "About something. Did you notice how she couldn't meet my eyes when she mentioned the parcel?" "I noticed she looked as though she wished us at the bottom of the river." They walked back toward the motor car. The church bell was tolling for noon, and somewhere a dog barked in the distance. Tuppence paused at the gate that led toward Church Lane. "This is where the bicycle was found," she murmured, "left neatly against the fence as if Lucy meant to come back." And didn't. The mist had returned, curling like smoke along the lane. A chill ran through Tuppence that had nothing to do with the weather. "Tommy," she said softly, "whatever was in that parcel, it frightened her. And if someone wanted it badly enough to make a girl disappear, then this isn't just a village mystery." He nodded grimly. "All right, partner, let's see where the errand girl's last delivery takes us." As they climbed into the car, the first drops of rain began to fall, small, insistent, and cold. Somewhere behind them, unseen in the thickening mist, a shutter creaked open, and a watcher's eyes followed them down the lane. The vanishing of Lucy Hargreaves had begun to ripple outward, touching all who lived in Sutton Lee. And before long, Tommy and Tuppence would learn that even the smallest parcel might conceal a secret big enough to kill. Still that same late morning, they reached the vicarage of Sutton Lee, which stood on a slight rise above the village, a square Georgian house, its red brick mellowed by ivy and years of rain. The late morning mist still clung to the garden like gauze as Tommy steered the motor car up the gravel path. The church bell, faint behind them, tolled noon, and a rook cawed from the beech tree that leaned precariously toward the lane. Tuppence tightened the belt of her navy coat and studied the house with her usual quiet alertness. "You know," she said, "I've always found vicars suspiciously neat. No one can keep lace curtains that white without some moral deficiency." Tommy grinned. "You'd better keep that theory to yourself until after he's poured the sherry." They were admitted by a young maid, with a nervous expression and a slight stammer, who led them down a narrow corridor smelling faintly of beeswax and hymn books. The Reverend Holt received them in his study, a tall, mild man with hair prematurely silver and eyes the colour of faded violets. "My dear Mr. and Mrs. Beresford," he said, shaking hands with gentle formality. "Inspector Craddock mentioned you might call. Please, sit down." Tuppence accepted the invitation with the air of a woman who had already decided to find the truth behind the wallpaper. "We understand you were expecting a delivery from Lucy Hargreaves on Tuesday evening." The vicar sighed. "Yes, indeed. Mrs. Vale telephoned that she was sending round a parcel. Books for the parish library, she said. I was in my study most of the evening, but the girl never arrived. When I heard next morning that she'd vanished, I was greatly distressed. Poor child." "Did anyone call at the vicarage that evening?" Tommy asked. "Only Mrs. Holt's cousin, Mr. Eustace. He dined with us. He left around 9:30. Tuppence's eyes flicked toward the side table, where a neat row of correspondence lay beside a vase of lilies. "Forgive me, Reverend, but the girl's bicycle was found near your gate. Surely you'd have heard her arrive." He hesitated. "It's possible I was in the vestry about that time, attending to the accounts. My wife retired early with a headache." The tone was mild, but Tuppence heard what was not said, the faint evasion beneath the surface. A polite cough drew their attention to the doorway. The maid hovered there, her hands twisting in her apron. "Beg pardon, sir. Might I speak a moment? About that evening?" The vicar frowned. "Mary, I told you the inspector asked his questions." "Yes, sir, but it's just I saw someone on the path that night, not long after 8. Thought it was Lucy, but—" "But what?" Tuppence prompted gently. "She was walking funny-like," the girl said. "Slow, as if she were listening behind her. And she had a red scarf. Lucy's was blue. I thought maybe she'd borrowed one." "Did you see her face?" Mary shook her head. "Too dark, ma'am, but she looked smaller somehow, that's all." The vicar cleared his throat. "Thank you, Mary. That will do." The maid retreated, clearly relieved to escape. When the door closed, Tuppence leaned back in her chair. A girl in the right place, wrong scarf, walking as if afraid. "Reverend, may we see the garden, just for a sense of the path?" The vicar hesitated, then nodded. "If you wish." Outside, the air was crisp and bright, the mist thinning into ragged strands. Gravel crunched beneath their shoes as they followed the narrow path leading from the side gate toward the lane. Tuppence paused halfway, crouching near the border where a bicycle's tire had left a faint groove in the damp earth. "There," she murmured. "And look, muddy footprints, small, light, and deliberate." Tommy bent beside her. "Deliberate?" "Yes. See how each one points straight to the rear gate, none doubled back. Whoever made these wasn't wandering. She, or someone, knew exactly where they were going." Tommy straightened, glancing toward the trees that bordered the churchyard. "And the tracks vanished there." Tuppence's gaze lingered on the woods beyond, silent and indifferent. Vanishing seems to be a fashion in Sutton. As they walked back toward the car, she noticed a faint mark on the back of the vicarage gate, scratches fresh and sharp as if from metal. She ran her fingertip along them thoughtfully. Tommy followed her look. "A clue, partner?" "Or a warning," she said softly, "but I haven't decided which." They drove away under a sky paling toward noon. In the rearview mirror, the vicarage seemed to shrink into the distance, its ivy-clad walls hiding more than sermons. By late afternoon, the Beresfords had settled at the small inn, with the parcel log she had persuaded the constable to lend her, a neat ledger found tucked inside Lucy's satchel near the vicarage gate. Each entry was in careful handwriting. Mrs. Farley, parcel of buttons. Miss Brown, length of silk. Reverend Holt, 1 box. Vicarage by hand. And nothing after that. Tuppence traced the words with a fingertip. By hand. Why emphasize that? She delivered parcels daily, yet this one gets special mention. Tommy leaned against the mantel. Maybe she expected to hand it to the Reverend personally. Or maybe she was told she mustn't hand it to anyone else, Tuppence mused. That's different. He poured her tea and sat opposite. So far we have 1 missing girl, 1 vanished parcel, 1 vicar who seems nervous, and 1 maid who can't tell a red scarf from a blue one. And, she added, a bicycle found exactly where it shouldn't be. If Lucy was abducted, why leave it behind? Too tidy, almost as if someone wanted it discovered. Tommy grinned faintly. "I see that look. You're constructing conspiracies again." "I prefer to call them patterns," Tuppence replied serenely. "Every mystery is a pattern waiting for its missing piece. The trick is to notice the gaps before someone fills them with lies." Outside, dusk was falling. The inn's window panes glowed with amber reflections, and the sound of laughter drifted faintly from the tap room. The calm felt fragile, as though the night itself were listening. Tuppence was about to rise when she heard the faint scrape of paper against the floorboards. A folded note had slipped under their door, its edge catching the lamplight. Tommy was there first. He picked it up, brow furrowed. No address, just us. Tuppence unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was uneven, almost childlike, the ink smudged. "Stop asking about the parcel." That was all. For a long moment neither spoke. The clock on the mantel ticked with exaggerated calm, marking the silence between them. Then Tuppence said softly, "Well, Tommy dear, it appears our curiosity has been noticed." He nodded grimly. "And by someone who doesn't write letters of appreciation." Tuppence folded the note, slipping it into her handbag as if it were a treasure. "Which means," she said, eyes alight with mischief and purpose, "we're exactly where we ought to be." Morning broke over Sutton Lee with deceptive gentleness, a pale sunlight glinting on damp cobblestones, a chill wind teasing the bunting left from some forgotten fate. It was the sort of English day that pretends to be harmless while quietly nursing secrets. Tommy and Tuppence Beresford stepped out from the Swan and Crown just as the church clock struck 9. Tuppence wore her sensible navy coat and a small cloche hat that somehow made her look both brisk and mischievous. Tommy, hands in pockets, strolled beside her with the air of a man resigned to trouble before breakfast. "Well," he said, "where does our round of rural interrogation begin? The vicarage gave us mystery. Perhaps the post office will provide enlightenment and stamps." Tuppence smiled faintly. "I should think the post office knows everything that goes through this village, including gossip. Let's start there." The post office of Sutton Lee was a cramped corner of the grocer's shop, presided over by a clerk so thin and twitchy he looked perpetually surprised to find himself alive. His name, the sign said, was Mr. Peabody. When the Beresfords entered, he was sorting envelopes with a care that suggested each one might explode. "Good morning," said Tuppence pleasantly. "We're making a few inquiries about a girl named Lucy Hargreaves. I understand she collected a parcel from here last Tuesday." Peabody's fingers froze on the envelopes. His Adam's apple bobbed like a caught cork. Yes, Mrs. Hargreaves's girl. That's right. Parcel for the vicarage." "From whom?" His eyes darted left and right. "From a gentleman, ma'am. Came in that morning, tall, bowler hat, London sort of accent. Said he'd pay the girl herself if she'd deliver it by hand." "How much did he pay?" Tommy asked. Peabody hesitated. "A sovereign. More than it was worth, sir, that's certain." Tuppence exchanged a glance with Tommy. "Did you notice the parcel? What it looked like?" "Brown paper, tied with red string, about so big." He held up his trembling hands. "Didn't weigh much. Could have been a book, maybe. He said it was urgent. Odd thing, though, he didn't put a return address, just said, 'For Reverend Holt, Vicarage, Sutton Lee.' Then he asked if we had a reliable girl." "And you recommended Lucy," Tuppence said softly. "Well, she was here, collecting thread for Mrs. Vale. Seemed handy enough. I didn't think, good heavens, if I'd known." He broke off, rubbing his hands together miserably. Tuppence's tone gentled. "You couldn't have known, Mr. Peabody. But this London gentleman, did he give his name?" Peabody shook his head. "No, ma'am. Only said he was a friend of the Reverend's." Outside again, Tommy drew a long breath. A London stranger, paying over the odds for an errand. Smells of cloak and dagger. "Or of someone hiding behind polite errands," Tuppence murmured. "People like that rely on invisibility. And who notices an errand girl?" Their next stop was the grocer's, a low-ceilinged shop smelling of coffee and paraffin. Mr. Cribbins, the grocer, was a round man with a magnificent moustache and a habit of leaning confidentially across the counter. "Ah, Mrs. Beresford, isn't it? I heard you're taking an interest in our poor Lucy. Dreadful business. Dreadful." "You knew her well?" Tuppence asked, selecting this moment to inspect a jar of barley sugar. "Everyone knew Lucy," he said, lowering his voice. "Good girl, hard worker. But lately, well, she'd changed a bit. Came in smiling to herself, saying she'd found a way to make extra money honest-like. I told her not to go taking odd jobs from strangers, but she laughed. Said it was a secret job, just for a few weeks. And now—" He spread his hands sorrowfully. Tommy frowned. "A secret job, and then she disappears. Hardly a coincidence." "Ah, but the thing is, sir," said Mr. Cribbins, lowering his voice further, "this isn't the first time. There was another girl from East Marham, 3 months ago. Did sewing for Mrs. Vale's cousin. She vanished too. Police said runaway, but folk here know better. Too much vanishing about lately, if you ask me." Tuppence felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draughty shop. "Another girl? And no connection made? That's rather convenient." The grocer gave her a long look. "Convenient for some, maybe, but we mind our business in Sutton Lee. Best way to stay peaceful." They thanked him and left. By the time they returned to the inn for luncheon, the Beresfords had accumulated a small avalanche of half-truths. Everyone had seen Lucy, on the lane at the post office outside the church, but never quite at the same time or place. Each recollection overlapped, blurred, as if the village itself were conspiring to confuse. Tuppence sat at a small table by the window, turning the facts over in her mind while Tommy unfolded the chronicle and ordered steak and kidney pie. "Well," he said, "it seems our missing girl was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere on Tuesday night." "Everyone remembers her differently," Tuppence mused. "One says blue scarf, another red. One says she walked, another that she cycled. It's like a village hallucination." "Maybe they all saw what they wanted to see," Tommy said, "or what they were told to see." The waitress appeared with their plates, a plump, freckled young woman with tired eyes and a hesitant smile. She moved efficiently, but when Tuppence thanked her, she gave a start, nearly upsetting the gravy boat. "Everything all right?" Tommy asked lightly. "Oh, yes, sir," she said quickly. "Quite all right." Tuppence waited until she'd gone, then said quietly, "That girl knows something." "About the pie?" "About Lucy. Watch her hands when I mention the parcel." When the waitress returned with the tea, Tuppence looked up with studied casualness. "Tell me, my dear, did Lucy Hargreaves ever come in here? Perhaps to fetch something, or deliver a parcel?" The girl froze mid-motion. The teacup rattled in its saucer, and before either of them could move, her tray slipped from her hands, crashing to the floor. Crockery shattered. The room went still. I'm so sorry," she stammered, kneeling to gather the fragments. Her face had drained of colour. Tommy bent to help her. "Accidents happen," he said kindly. "But what made you jump like that? Was it something we said?" She hesitated, eyes flicking to the bar where the innkeeper glowered. "I'd best not talk here, sir, not with him listening." "Then perhaps later," Tuppence suggested softly. "We'll be in the lounge after supper, if you change your mind." The girl nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and hurried away with the broken crockery. Tommy exhaled. "Well, that was dramatic." "Not dramatic, telling," Tuppence said. "She knows something, and someone doesn't want her to tell it." They lingered over tea while the murmur of village conversation resumed. From the window, Tuppence could see the church spire, the cobbled square, and beyond it the road that wound toward the woods. Everything looked perfectly ordinary, quaint, harmless. Yet beneath that picture postcard calm lay fear, thick as mist. Tommy folded his newspaper. "You realize what all this means, don't you?" "That the village is lying." "That the village is afraid," he corrected. "Everyone we meet speaks as if someone else were listening. Either Sutton Lee is haunted by superstition, or by a secret worth killing for." Tuppence's gaze darkened thoughtfully. "And the key to that secret, Tommy, is still the parcel. Whatever was inside it made Lucy vanish, and it's making others silent." A log cracked sharply in the fireplace, startling them both. "Next step?" Tommy asked. She smiled faintly. "We dine, we wait for our waitress, and we keep our ears open. Because Sutton Lee," she said, lowering her voice, "knows too much, and says far too little." Outside, the wind had risen, rattling the inn's shutters. The afternoon light dimmed, and the first hint of rain spattered against the window pane. Somewhere beyond the square, a door slammed, and a figure crossed hurriedly toward the woods, coat collar high, hat pulled low. Neither of the Beresfords saw it, but the village did. Sutton Lee always saw everything, just never quite at the right time. The rain began without warning, one of those abrupt English downpours that seemed to spill from a ruptured sky. By the time Tommy and Tuppence reached the edge of the village green, the cobbles gleamed like glass, and the air smelled of drenched earth and wood smoke. "Typical," Tommy muttered, turning up his collar. "A fine day for strolling into the unknown, and we choose the only hour it decides to impersonate the flood." Tuppence, undeterred, clutched her umbrella with military precision. "Nonsense. A little rain never ruined a good clue. Besides, Lucy was last seen near the wood path, and I'd rather follow her footprints before the rain washes them away entirely." "Ever the optimist," he sighed. "If we end up lost in the brambles, I'm holding you personally responsible." The lane narrowed as they left the village behind, flanked by hedges heavy with rain. Beyond the stile, the woods began, a tangle of beeches and oaks, their branches dripping silver threads. The ground was soft and dark, carpeted with wet leaves that muffled their steps. For a while they walked in silence, the only sounds the patter of rain and the occasional creak of branches. Then, from somewhere ahead, came the faint rhythmic chop of an axe. Tuppence halted. "Someone's there." They followed the sound until the trees parted to reveal a clearing. A man stood by a pile of freshly cut logs, his figure broad-shouldered and stooped with age. He wore a mackintosh patched at the elbows, and his face, weathered as bark, was framed by a bristle of grey beard. The forester looked up as they approached, his expression unreadable beneath the dripping brim of his hat. "Afternoon," he said curtly. "Afternoon," Tommy replied cheerfully. "Beastly weather for chopping wood." "Work doesn't wait on weather," the man said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. Tuppence gave him her most disarming smile. "We're looking for the spot where Lucy Hargreaves was last seen. I believe it was somewhere near here." The man's gaze hardened. "You're not the police?" "No," Tuppence said lightly. "Merely interested parties." "That's worse." He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "You'd best leave this business alone. Sutton Lee doesn't take kindly to strangers asking questions." "Meaning?" Tommy asked. The forester's eyes flicked toward the trees as though the woods themselves might be listening. "Meaning some things don't like to be dug up. Not bones nor secrets." He turned back to his logs with finality, shoulders hunched. The axe bit into the wood again, sharp and final. Tuppence and Tommy exchanged a glance and continued along the path. The air seemed heavier now, the rain more deliberate. Every sound felt amplified. The drip of water, the snap of twigs underfoot, the distant call of a crow. A few yards on, Tuppence stopped abruptly. "Tommy, look." She pointed to a low branch where a scrap of fabric fluttered weakly in the rain, a shred of blue wool frayed and muddy at the edges. Tuppence tugged it free and turned it over in her palm. "Part of a scarf," she murmured. "Could be Lucy's." Tommy frowned. "She was said to have worn blue, wasn't she? The maid at the vicarage mentioned that." "Yes. And see how it's torn, snagged, as if she'd been pulled back or startled." They followed the direction of the branch, eyes scanning the ground. The path dipped into a hollow where the trees grew closer, their roots twisting like knotted fingers. Rain pooled in the dips of mossy stones, and there, half hidden by ivy and bracken, stood a circular mound of old stone, the remnants of a well. The stones were green with lichen, and the mouth of the well was covered by a heavy iron grate secured by a thick rusted chain. Water dripped steadily from somewhere below, echoing faintly in the hollow dark. Tuppence stepped closer, the hem of her coat brushing the wet grass. "An old village well," she whispered. "Long disused, I'd say. But why chain it shut?" Tommy crouched beside it, testing the chain. "Solid enough. Looks like it's been locked for years." "Or recently relocked," Tuppence countered. "The padlock isn't rusty, see the sheen? And look here, the ground's disturbed. Someone's been standing here recently." He straightened. "You think Lucy might have come this far?" "I think," she said slowly, "that whatever frightened her, it happened near this well." She leaned over the grate and peered down. The darkness seemed to breathe. Drops of rain fell through the iron bars, each one vanishing with a hollow plink. The echo was endless, deep, patient, lonely. Tommy's hand found her elbow. "Careful, Tuppence." "I'm fine." Her voice was hushed, reverent. "Just water at the bottom, nothing else." "Let's keep it that way," he muttered, drawing her gently back. They stood for a long moment, listening to the rain's whisper over stone. Then Tuppence said softly, "Do you feel it, Tommy? The air, something about it, as if the place remembers." He gave a short laugh, more to dispel the chill than from amusement. "You've been reading too many Gothic novels." But when they turned to leave, both glanced back, just once, at the chained well, its presence brooding beneath the trees. The path wound uphill, slick with mud. As they neared the clearing again, the forester was gone. Only the faint smoke of a dying pipe hung in the air, mingling with the rain. By the time they reached the inn, the rain had eased to a fine drizzle. The lamps in the windows glowed like small, defiant suns against the grey. Inside, the fire crackled, and a pot of tea steamed invitingly on the hearth. Tuppence sank into the nearest armchair, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "That man knew something," she said. "You heard him, strangers asking questions. It wasn't a warning, it was a confession in disguise. Tommy poured tea, frowning. If Lucy came that way, someone stopped her. Maybe the forester himself. Perhaps, but why warn us off if he were guilty? No, I think he's frightened. The woods hold some secret he doesn't dare voice. She sipped her tea thoughtfully, then added, "And there's still the matter of that well." Tommy's eyes narrowed. A well in a village that whispers, a missing girl, and a chain that's newer than the stones it guards. It's beginning to sound like one of those lurid stories you adore. "I don't adore them," she said primly. "I just happen to be right about them." He smiled, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. "I'll ask the constable about it tomorrow. For now, let's get some rest. I've had enough ghosts and mud for one day." The night fell thick and silent. The rain stopped altogether, leaving the air heavy with damp. The inn was quiet, save for the occasional creak of old timber and the sigh of wind through the chimney. Tommy, half asleep in the armchair by the window, stirred at a faint sound, the soft scrape of gravel just outside. He frowned, listening. Another sound followed, a whisper of movement, the barest suggestion of a figure passing close beneath the sill. He rose quietly, parting the curtain with care. Outside, the fog had rolled back in, wrapping the square in ghostly folds. Through it, for one fleeting instant, he saw a shape, a man standing motionless, face obscured, the glow of a cigarette burning in the gloom. The ember flared once, bright and brief. Then the shape turned, swallowed by mist, and was gone. Tommy stood very still, the curtain still between his fingers. Somewhere far off, a church bell tolled midnight, its notes soft and hollow. When he finally returned to the armchair, the last trace of the cigarette's glow had faded from his mind, but the unease remained, a small ember that refused to die. And outside, in the woods beyond Sutton Lee, the chained well waited, silent, patient, and watching. The morning after the shadow in the fog began innocently enough, sunlight slanting through the curtains, the smell of bacon and coffee drifting from the inn's kitchen, and Tommy humming tunelessly as he shaved. It might have been any quiet village morning if not for the knock that sounded at their door just as the clock struck 9. Tuppence, already dressed and writing notes from the previous day, looked up. "That," she said, "isn't Albert with the breakfast tray. It's the sound of officialdom." Tommy opened the door to reveal a tall man in a dark overcoat, his face lined by both intelligence and irritation. His bowler hat dripped faintly from the mist outside. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford?" he asked, voice clipped. "Inspector Craddock, Scotland Yard, attached to Market Lacey for this case." "Of course," Tuppence said pleasantly. "Do come in. We've been expecting someone to tell us to mind our own business." Craddock gave a thin smile. "Then I'll save us the trouble of ceremony." He stepped inside, closing the door with the air of a man used to ending conversations before they began. Tommy gestured toward the armchair. "Coffee, Inspector? We have plenty, though not perhaps the Yard's preferred brand." "No, thank you." Craddock removed his gloves with deliberate precision. "Let's make one thing clear. I heard of your investigation from the local constabulary. I must remind you both that Scotland Yard is handling the disappearance of Miss Hargreaves. You'd be well advised to return to your domestic pursuits." Tuppence's smile was as bright as the morning sun. Domestic pursuits sound dreadfully dull compared to a vanished girl, a mysterious parcel, and a vicarage that pretends ignorance. "I do embroidery, Inspector, but even my patience has limits." Craddock sighed as though he had anticipated this exact reply. "You don't understand. This case is sensitive." "Meaning political?" Tommy asked. "Meaning dangerous," Craddock corrected. He regarded them both sharply. "You've stumbled onto something you can't possibly grasp. Leave it." Tuppence leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "We might consider that, Inspector, if only you told us what exactly Lucy carried that warranted such urgency." Craddock hesitated. His jaw worked once, twice. "What makes you think she carried anything unusual?" "The man at the post office said the parcel came from London," Tuppence replied softly. "And London doesn't pay sovereigns for errands to country vicars unless something's amiss. That was your first mistake, Inspector, assuming we're meddling for fun." The silence stretched. Then Craddock exhaled heavily, as if conceding a small battle. "Very well. Off the record. The parcel likely contained classified material, documents belonging to the Ministry of Communications. They went missing last week from a secure office in Whitehall. Good heavens, Tommy said. And they ended up tied with red string and entrusted to an errand girl. Craddock's eyes were grim. The thief used couriers, unwitting ones, ordinary people who wouldn't draw suspicion. It's possible Lucy was one of them. The others vanished too. Tuppence's expression softened. So she was tricked. Precisely. And once she realized what she carried, she became a liability. That's why you must leave this to us. These aren't village gossips you're chasing. They're professionals. She rose and crossed to the window, looking out at the glistening street. Inspector, do you truly think I can sit quietly while a frightened girl's life is brushed under the carpet because it's political? No, thank you. Craddock looked from one to the other, resignation flickering in his eyes. You won't listen. Tommy shrugged good-naturedly. She never has. The inspector straightened, donning his gloves once more. Then I'll say this. If you must meddle, do it quietly. And for heaven's sake, trust no one from London who arrives with a pleasant smile. He left as abruptly as he had come, leaving behind a faint scent of tobacco and unease. The afternoon passed in uneasy reflection. The village square seemed more watchful than usual, its curtains drawn, its people briskly polite. Even the postmaster avoided their eyes. By evening, the rain had begun again, thin, persistent, whispering against the panes. The Swan and Crown's parlour was nearly empty, save for the crackling fire and the low hum of a wireless in the next room. Tuppence sat with a book unopened in her lap, her thoughts elsewhere. Tommy was halfway through his second pint when the inn door swung open. A gust of damp air accompanied the newcomer, a man of medium height, immaculately dressed in a grey overcoat and matching hat. His shoes gleamed, and a faint cologne of sandalwood followed him like an afterthought. He paused just inside the doorway, scanning the room with quick precision. His eyes landed on the Beresfords, and after a moment's deliberation he approached. Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, I believe. His voice was low, cultured, touched with London polish. That depends who's asking, Tommy replied pleasantly. The man smiled. My name is Dennison. I believe we share an unfortunate acquaintance, Miss Lucy Hargreaves. I employed her for a small task through my London agency. Tuppence's eyebrows lifted. Indeed. Then perhaps you can tell us why your small task ended in her disappearance. Dennison's composure didn't waver, though his eyes flickered briefly. A tragedy, of course, but I assure you, I am as concerned as anyone. The matter was a simple delivery, confidential business documents for a client, nothing more sinister. Documents bound for the vicarage, I suppose? Tommy asked casually. The man hesitated the barest fraction. Yes, that's right. The Reverend is a distant acquaintance. He occasionally assists with my charitable work. Charity from London? Tuppence's tone was light, but her gaze sharp. How benevolent! Dennison smiled again, this time thinner. You seem sceptical, Mrs. Beresford. Experience, she said. Every time someone tells me a case is simple, it turns out to involve a forged will or a body in the pantry. For the first time, a faint crease appeared between Dennison's brows. Forgive me, but I came merely to inquire whether Miss Hargreaves had been found. If not, I shall notify my office, and she hasn't, Tommy said curtly. And your office can wait. Tell me, Mr. Dennison, what exactly was in the parcel? The man's eyes turned wary. Company materials, nothing of interest to you. Then why lie about your address? Tuppence asked softly. He froze. What? Your name appears in the inn register, she said, tapping the open ledger on the counter beside her. But your address, Mayfair House, London, doesn't exist. I checked this morning out of sheer curiosity. Dennison's mask slipped for a heartbeat, an instant of tension before he forced a laugh. Clerical error, no doubt. Good evening. He tipped his hat and turned sharply, leaving the inn as swiftly as he'd entered. The door swung shut behind him, letting in a gust of cold air. Tommy rose, moving to the window. He's heading for the square. No suitcase, no umbrella. I'd wager he's not coming back. Tuppence joined him, watching as the grey figure vanished into the deepening dusk. A London gentleman who travels light and lies well, she murmured. I think we've just met the spider at the centre of the web. Or one of its legs, Tommy said grimly. Still, Craddock was right. This is bigger than a missing girl." She turned to him with a half-smile. "When has that ever stopped us?" Later that night, long after the fire had burned to embers, Tommy sat at the writing desk in their room, the inn's ledger open before him. His pen tapped absently against the page beside Dennison's neat false entry. Mayfair House, London. He checked the date, frowning. Dennison had registered 2 nights earlier, before the Beresfords even arrived in Sutton Lee. He'd been here all along, waiting. "Tuppence," he said quietly. She stirred from her drowsy reading. "What is it?" "He signed in before us, 2 days early." Her eyes widened. "Then he wasn't looking for us. He was waiting for someone else, or something." Tommy nodded slowly. "The parcel, perhaps." She closed her book and rose, coming to stand beside him. "Then we'll find out who he was really meeting, and why Lucy Hargreaves never returned from her errand." Outside, the wind rose again, sighing through the chimney like a restless ghost. Somewhere in the square below, footsteps echoed briefly and faded. The Beresfords stood side by side in the lamplight, the ledger open between them, the ink of Dennison's false name glistening faintly, like the signature of danger itself. The day after their encounter with Mr. Dennison dawned pale and wind-streaked, the kind of morning that made the village hedgerows bend like penitents under invisible hands. Sutton Lee had the uneasy quiet of a place that knew it was being watched. Curtains twitched, doors opened and shut too quickly. The postmaster, usually talkative, turned suddenly deaf when Tommy tried to greet him. Tuppence was having none of it. "When a village grows silent," she declared over breakfast, "that means it has far too much to hide." Tommy folded his newspaper and nodded toward the window, where the lane gleamed with overnight rain. "And I assume you plan to make it talk?" "Precisely," she said, fastening her hat. "While you charm the men at the pub, I shall call on Mrs. Hargreaves. Poor woman, someone must offer comfort. And perhaps, while comforting, I might ask a few questions." Tommy sighed. "And by comfort you mean investigation." "Of course," she said sweetly. "Isn't that what wives are for?" Mrs. Hargreaves lived at the far end of Church Lane in a narrow red-brick cottage, whose garden was now overrun with weeds. The windows were curtained, and the front gate hung half off its hinges. When Tuppence knocked, a face appeared behind the glass, wary, pale, and older than she remembered from their first meeting. "Oh, Mrs. Beresford." The door opened hesitantly. "You're kind to come. Everyone else seems to have forgotten my Lucy already." "Not everyone," Tuppence said gently. "May I come in?" The interior smelled faintly of lavender and coal dust. The little parlour was spotless, painfully so, as though the woman's grief had found refuge in polishing and folding. A framed photograph of Lucy sat on the mantel, a smiling young girl in a simple dress, eyes bright with life. Mrs. Hargreaves followed Tuppence's gaze. She wasn't perfect, of course. None of us are. But she was a good girl. Never stole a thing, never told a lie that wasn't out of kindness. Tuppence took her hand. "I believe you. But tell me, did Lucy ever speak of anyone new? Anyone from outside Sutton Lee?" The woman hesitated. "Only once, maybe 2 weeks before she went missing. Said she'd met someone who could help her earn more money. A London gentleman. I told her to be careful. She laughed, said he was respectable. She said his name was Dennison, I think." Tuppence's eyes softened. "That name seems to appear everywhere these days." Mrs. Hargreaves's voice trembled. "They say he's from the city. They say he works with the government. But why would such a man bother with my Lucy? She was clever, yes, but just a village girl." "Perhaps that's exactly why," Tuppence murmured. The woman gave a shaky sigh. "If only I hadn't let her take that job. She said it was simple. Deliver a parcel, that's all. I thought nothing of it." Her voice caught. "If she were alive, she'd have written. I know she would." Tuppence rose quietly. "Would you mind if I looked into her room again? Sometimes a second glance reveals what the first missed." Mrs. Hargreaves nodded wearily. "Do as you like, dear. I can't bear to go in there myself." Lucy's room was small and tidy, a patchwork of youthful dreams and modest practicality. A blue scarf hung over the bedpost, the twin, perhaps, of the one torn in the woods. On the windowsill stood a vase of wilted wildflowers, long dead but carefully arranged. Tuppence began methodically, drawers, boxes beneath the bed. There was nothing out of place until she reached the small writing desk in the corner. The top drawer slid open reluctantly, protesting with a faint creak. Inside lay the usual clutter: buttons, a broken locket, a scrap of ribbon, a stub of pencil. But something about the drawer's depth caught her attention. She ran her fingers along the back and felt a ridge, as though the lining had been glued over something. With the careful patience of experience, she worked her nail beneath the edge until the paper peeled away. Behind it was a photograph, old, creased at the corners, but unmistakably deliberate in its concealment. She held it up to the light. 5 people stood before a grand country house, an austere stone manor surrounded by clipped hedges. 4 adults and a young girl. Her breath caught. The girl was Lucy, younger perhaps by a year, smiling shyly. Beside her, unmistakable even in shadow, was the elegant profile of Mr. Denison. "Well," she murmured, "so the gentleman from London has been here before." The other faces were unfamiliar. A woman in pearls, a man in military uniform, another standing slightly apart, his expression obscured by glare. But something about their arrangement felt uneasy, formal, not friendly. She slipped the photograph into her handbag just as Mrs. Hargreaves's voice called softly from the hall. "Have you found anything?" Tuppence turned, smile practised. "Nothing important, but I think Lucy may have known more about that London gentleman than anyone guessed." The widow's eyes filled with sudden, frightened understanding. "You mean she wasn't just a messenger?" Tuppence hesitated. "I mean she may have been caught in something far beyond her knowing. But I promise you this, we'll find the truth." Meanwhile, Tommy had taken a different approach. By early afternoon, he was seated at the corner table of the King's Arms, the local pub whose clientele consisted chiefly of men who pretended to work harder than they did. The air was thick with pipe smoke and the tang of ale. He ordered a pint and waited, letting the hum of conversation wash over him. Country pubs, he had learned, were like confessionals, provided you ordered the right number of drinks in the right order. After 20 minutes, a man in a worn tweed coat slid onto the stool beside him. "You're the chap asking about the missing girl, aren't you?" "Depends who's asking," Tommy said easily. "Name's Carter. I keep the watch shop next door. Know a bit about everyone in Sutton-Lee." Tommy smiled. "Then perhaps you can tell me what you know about a Mr. Denison." The man's brows rose. "Ah, him. Turned up here a few weeks back. Rented the upper room of Mrs. Vale's old place by the river. Said he was from London, working on some estate business. Kept to himself mostly, but I saw him one night, walking with the vicar's secretary." "Really?" Tommy leaned in. "When was that?" "Late, after 10. I was closing up. They were by the churchyard gate, talking low. Looked like a quarrel. He grabbed her arm, she pulled away." "Did she say anything?" "Couldn't hear, but she looked frightened. Next morning Denison came in for tobacco, calm as anything." Tommy finished his pint thoughtfully. "The secretary, what's her name?" "Miss Calthorpe, lives near the Green. You'll know her, thin, pale, eyes like she's seen too much." "Thank you," Tommy said, standing. "You've been extremely helpful." "Don't mention it," Carter said, "though if I were you, I'd stop asking. People in Sutton-Lee don't like outsiders stirring ghosts." When Tommy returned to the inn, the lamps were already lit against the encroaching dusk. Tuppence was waiting in the parlour, coat still damp from the rain. She held the photograph delicately between her fingers. "Look what I found," she said quietly. He studied it, whistling under his breath. "Denison again. And this house, looks like a manor, could be local." "There's something else," she said. "Lucy wasn't a stranger to him. She was part of whatever this is long before that parcel. Perhaps she worked for them before, perhaps she saw too much." Tommy recounted his conversation at the pub, watching her expression sharpen with each word. "The secretary," she murmured. "Miss Calthorpe. If Denison met her that night, then the vicarage isn't merely innocent charity work." "And if Lucy ever confided in her," Tommy added, "then she may hold the missing piece." Tuppence slipped the photograph back into her handbag. "Then we'll pay her a visit in the morning. But tonight, Tommy, lock the door. Sutton-Lee's secrets are starting to stir." Outside, the wind rose again, whistling faintly down the chimney. Somewhere beyond the village, in the direction of the river, a light flickered briefly and vanished, like a signal answered in darkness. And in her handbag, the photograph lay silent, its frozen smiles concealing a history that had only begun to whisper its truth. The river wound through Sutton Lee like an old, secret thought, quiet, slow, and deeply unwilling to explain itself. On fog-heavy mornings it was no more than a pale shimmer through the reeds, but by afternoon it gathered a dull silver gleam, reflecting the sky's unsettled moods. It was toward that river, now sluggish under the weight of late-day mist, that Tommy and Tuppence Beresford walked. The postmaster's words from that morning still echoed in their minds. Denison rented a room by the water, Mrs. Vale's place. Keeps herself to herself. You won't get much out of her, not without a good story. Tuppence, never one to be deterred by privacy, adjusted the brim of her cloche hat. "Well then," she said briskly, "we shall give her a good story indeed." Tommy glanced sideways. "The last time you said that, we ended up pretending to be inspectors from the Ministry of Duck Populations." "It worked," she reminded him. "And this time we're antique dealers. Everyone loves a touch of harmless pretension, especially widows." The path followed the riverbank, winding between willow trees and rushes. The air smelled of damp wood and something faintly metallic, like old water trapped in stone. Ahead, the house came into view, a long, low building of weathered brick, its windows shuttered despite the daylight. Smoke drifted reluctantly from one chimney. Tuppence stopped, studying it. "A house that tries not to be seen," she murmured. "Always a bad sign." "Or a thrifty one," Tommy said, though without conviction. They crossed a small wooden bridge to the gate, where a brass plate read, "Mrs. A. Vale." Tuppence pressed the bell. Somewhere inside, a faint sound stirred. Footsteps, hesitant and slow. The door opened on a woman of indeterminate age, her figure slight beneath a dark shawl. Her eyes were pale, her face drawn and waxen, as though the river mist had seeped into her veins. "Yes," she said. Her tone carried the brittle politeness of someone accustomed to fending off curiosity. "Good afternoon," Tuppence said warmly. "We're terribly sorry to intrude, Mrs. Vale, but we're looking for a few small pieces, antique furniture, that sort of thing. We were told you might have some items for sale. Old mirrors, perhaps, or an escritoire." Mrs. Vale blinked. "Antiques? No, nothing of that sort." Tommy leaned forward with his best impression of earnest charm. "You see, my wife has an eye for craftsmanship. She spotted this house and declared it had the right look. Solid, timeless. It would be a crime not to ask." A flicker of something, vanity perhaps, passed over the woman's face. "Well, I suppose you might look about the hall. I've some odds and ends left from my husband's time." She led them inside. The air was cool and faintly damp, tinged with the smell of candle wax. Heavy curtains shut out what little sunlight there was, and even the furniture seemed to crouch in shadow. "Charming," Tuppence said lightly, her eyes sweeping the room. "You can always tell when a house has a history." Mrs. Vale's hand tightened on the edge of the sideboard. "Some histories are better left alone," Tuppence smiled. "Oh, indeed. Still, they do make good stories." Tommy busied himself inspecting a mahogany chair, but his attention drifted toward the back hallway where a faint scuff mark caught his eye. Muddy, recent. "Do you have anyone else living here, Mrs. Vale?" Tuppence asked conversationally. "No," the answer came too quickly. "I manage alone. I have a charwoman come once a week, that's all." "Brave of you," Tuppence murmured. "A house this size must feel rather lonely." Mrs. Vale gave no answer. Her gaze flicked toward the staircase as if expecting it to reply for her. Tommy cleared his throat. "Forgive me. Do you mind if I have a look at that table by the window? Lovely craftsmanship." Mrs. Vale nodded absently. As she turned to adjust the curtain, Tuppence's eyes caught something half hidden near the umbrella stand, a bicycle wheel caked with mud. Her pulse quickened. The rest of the bicycle was partly obscured by a folded rug, but enough showed to tell its story. A lady's model with a bent mudguard and a small leather pouch on the handle. The initials LH were faintly scratched into the frame. Lucy Hargreaves. Tuppence schooled her expression and kept her voice casual. "Do you ever let rooms, Mrs. Vale? It's the sort of house that would attract lodgers." The woman stiffened. "No, not anymore." "Not anymore?" "My husband, God rest him, used to take summer boarders. I stopped after he passed. People are a nuisance." "Quite so," Tuppence said sweetly, "though I dare say a gentleman from London would have been no trouble. Well-mannered, punctual, Mr. Denison, for instance." The effect was immediate. Mrs. Vale's face drained of colour. "I don't know that name." Tuppence's smile didn't waver. "Oh, perhaps I misheard at the post office. But funny, isn't it, how names linger in small places?" The silence that followed was brittle as glass. Then Mrs. Vale said abruptly, "If you've seen enough furniture, I'd like to rest. My health is poor." Tommy, sensing the shift, nodded politely. "Of course, we've taken too much of your time already." She ushered them toward the door, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the lock. But Tuppence's sharp eyes caught something else as they passed the hall table. A small notebook lying half under a folded shawl. Its cover was damp, the corner torn, and half of one page ripped clean away. "Curious little thing," Tuppence murmured as she brushed past. She didn't pause, but her mind catalogued it with surgical precision. Damp, recently handled, hidden in haste. At the threshold, Mrs. Vale's composure faltered. "I hope you found what you were looking for," she said, voice thin. Tuppence met her gaze. "I think we've only just begun, Mrs. Vale." Outside, the afternoon had grown darker, the river glinting dully between the reeds. The Beresfords walked in silence until the house disappeared behind the bend of the lane. Then Tommy exhaled sharply. "Well," he said, "either our widow is the world's worst liar, or she's hiding a small army in that house." Tuppence nodded. "Lucy's bicycle. I'd stake every bit of my reputation on it. And that notebook. Someone tried to remove something from it recently." Tommy frowned. "Then she knows more than she's admitting. But why keep the bicycle? That's foolish if she's involved." "Unless," Tuppence said slowly, "it wasn't hers to hide. Suppose Dennison left it there. Suppose she's being forced to keep silent." He considered that. "Then she's either a terrified accomplice or a prisoner in her own home." They reached the bridge and paused. The river moved sluggishly beneath them, carrying the reflection of a grey sky. Tuppence leaned on the railing, her expression thoughtful. "She said she used to take boarders. Dennison might have lodged there under some false name. He'd need privacy, to receive parcels, to meet people like the vicar's secretary." Tommy grimaced. "And if Lucy ever went there, perhaps to deliver something, she saw more than she should have." A gust of wind rippled through the reeds, making them hiss softly. It sounded, for all the world, like whispers. "Tommy," Tuppence said, her voice low, "did you notice the boots by the door?" "Yes, 2 pairs, one large, one small." "Too small for Mrs. Vale and too new for the charwoman. Someone else has been in that house recently." He nodded. "And she was frightened we'd notice." Tuppence drew her coat tighter. "Then whoever's staying there, whether it's Dennison or someone working with him, knows we're getting close." They started back toward the village, footsteps muffled on the wet path. The fog thickened around them until the world shrank to the narrow bridge, the whispering water, and the memory of Mrs. Vale's pale, haunted eyes. When they reached the far bank, Tuppence turned once more. The house by the river stood shrouded in mist, its windows shuttered, the faintest tremor of light flickering behind one curtain. "Tommy," she said softly, "if Lucy Hargreaves ever set foot inside that place, I fear she never left it again." Tommy slipped an arm around her shoulders, his tone grim but steady. "Then tomorrow, my dear, we go back, with a warrant in one hand and Craddock in the other." As they walked away, a single ripple spread across the river's surface, just one, and vanished into silence. Behind the shuttered windows of the house by the river, a candle guttered low, casting its light on a damp shawl and a torn notebook lying side by side on the table, like the remnants of someone's unfinished confession. And outside the door, 2 pairs of boots waited in the dark, one large, one unmistakably small. The rain had returned by morning, thin, cold and persistent, drumming steadily against the windows of the Swan and Crown. Inside, the fire hissed softly in protest, and the smell of wet wool and coffee filled the room. Tuppence sat at the small round table by the hearth, staring not at her breakfast but at the photograph spread before her. Lucy's smiling face stared back, unaware, frozen in that brief shimmer of youth, while Dennison stood beside it, elegant and faintly amused. It was the smile of a man who knew exactly what he was hiding. Tommy looked up from the newspaper. "I know that expression," he said mildly. "You're thinking of something dangerous." "I'm thinking," Tuppence replied, still studying the photograph, "that Lucy Hargreaves may have been cleverer than anyone suspected, and that she may have left something behind, something she wanted someone to find." Meaning? She leaned back, eyes glinting. Lucy loved books. Her mother said she read them between errands, always with one tucked under her arm. And yet, when I looked through her things, I didn't think to check the books properly. Tommy folded the paper. You think she hid something in one? Not think, no. She was frightened but methodical. She would have wanted to keep whatever she'd discovered safe, yet close enough that her mother wouldn't throw it away. Tommy grinned. A secret between the pages, like a schoolgirl's crush. Very well, Miss Marple of Middlesex. Let's go treasure hunting. By the time they reached the Hargreaves' cottage again, the rain had lessened to a drizzle, but the air still carried that grey, uneasy heaviness that precedes a revelation. Mrs. Hargreaves greeted them with a faint, anxious smile. "Oh, Mrs. Beresford, Mr. Beresford, you've come again. Have they found anything?" "Not yet," Tuppence said gently, "but we're getting closer. Might I look through Lucy's things again? There's something I'd like to check." The older woman hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. You were kind last time. I'll make tea." Tuppence climbed the narrow stairs, her steps muffled on the worn carpet. Lucy's room was just as they had left it, neat, orderly, and heartbreakingly still. The faint scent of lavender lingered, mingled with something sharper, like ink and paper. On the small bedside table stood 3 books, dog-eared, well-loved volumes, Pride and Prejudice, Jane Eyre, and The Secret Garden. Tuppence's fingers hovered, then chose the middle one. Jane Eyre. "Lucy," she murmured, "what did you hide in here?" She flipped through the pages. Nothing at first but the faint creak of the spine and the whisper of paper. Then, as she neared the middle, something resisted slightly. Page 217 felt thicker than it should. Carefully, she pried the edges apart, and there it was. A letter, neatly folded, sealed with a small smear of red wax. Her breath caught. "Got you." She slipped it free just as Tommy appeared in the doorway. "Find our treasure?" Tuppence held up the letter. "It's been hidden deliberately. See the wax. No address, no envelope. She wanted it safe, but not posted." "Let's open it." She hesitated. "Tommy, this might be evidence." "Then we're merely very curious witnesses." He produced his penknife and she broke the seal. Inside lay 2 sheets, the ink faint and hurried. The first line leapt out at her. "To be delivered only if I fail. Project Calyx must not reach them. The courier is one no one would suspect." She read the rest aloud, her voice low, steady. "Instructions remain as before. Use local channels. The vicarage will serve as point of exchange until further notice. Burn after reading. H." There was a long silence when she finished. The ticking of the clock downstairs seemed to grow louder, each second pressing like a heartbeat. "Project Calyx," Tommy said slowly. "That sounds like something straight from the War Office." Tuppence nodded. "And this courier, one no one would suspect. That was Lucy, Tommy. She was the courier." He frowned. "Then H must be the one who used her, the one running this, whatever it is. Spy ring, smuggling operation, take your pick." Tuppence turned the paper over thoughtfully. "Look, faint watermark." She held it to the light. "It's the vicarage crest, but the handwriting isn't Holt's." Tommy frowned. "Then whose?" "Someone who borrowed his stationery. The letter's signed H, and Harold Vale fits both the initial and the audacity." "Oh, he's mild enough," Tuppence said, "but that's exactly what makes him useful. Who would suspect a country vicar?" "He seemed harmless." "So did the serpent in Eden." Tommy exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You think he's behind it?" "I think he's involved," she said. "Perhaps unwillingly, perhaps not. But the letter proves that Lucy's errand was part of something organised, and Holt had the perfect cover. Letters, parish collections, parcels in and out. No one would question him." They heard the creak of a stair behind them. Mrs. Hargreaves appeared, holding a tray of tea. "Oh, I didn't mean to startle you. I thought you might want something warm." Tuppence quickly folded the letter back into the book. "Thank you, that's very kind. We were just admiring your daughter's reading habits. Such good taste." The woman smiled faintly. She did love her stories, said they were her escape. Her eyes clouded. If only she'd never taken that job. When she had gone, Tuppence replaced the book precisely where it had been. "We can't risk her finding it gone. Not yet." Tommy nodded. So, what's the plan? We test the vicar. If he's innocent, he'll be confused. If he's guilty, he'll give himself away. How? By bait, she said simply. We'll dangle something irresistible, mention a recovered document, hint at new information. If he's involved, he'll come looking for it. Tommy smiled crookedly. The old Beresford trap. It's served us well before, Tuppence said, and besides, I do love a good confession. That evening, the storm returned in earnest. Wind howled across the village green, rattling shutters and scattering leaves like frightened birds. The inn's common room was nearly empty, the few patrons huddled close to the fire. Tommy sat with a newspaper, pretending to read, while Tuppence wrote a short note in her neat, precise hand. To Reverend Holt, recovered portion of Calix's correspondence secured, will deliver upon assurance of discretion. She addressed it to the vicarage and handed it to the innkeeper. Would you be so kind as to see this delivered tonight? It's rather urgent. The man nodded, sliding the letter into his coat pocket. Aye, ma'am, I'll see it done. When he was gone, Tommy said, That should stir the waters, but suppose it reaches the wrong hands first. That's the point, she replied. If the Reverend's involved, he'll act before morning. If not, Denison, or whoever H is, will. Outside, rain lashed against the windows, blurring the lamplight into streaks of gold. It was near midnight when Tommy stirred from his armchair. The inn was dark, the fire reduced to embers. He thought he heard something, faint footsteps on the stairs. He crossed to the door silently and peered through the crack. A shadow moved across the landing, a figure cloaked in dark, carrying a lantern muffled with cloth. It paused, then descended. Tuppence appeared beside him, eyes bright even in the gloom. He's taken the bait, she whispered. They followed at a distance, slipping into their coats. Outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle, the air thick with mist. The figure crossed the green and turned toward the church path. Reverend Holt, Tommy murmured, recognizing the stooped gate. They trailed him until he reached the vicarage gate. There he stopped, glancing about before unlocking the door and slipping inside. Light glowed briefly from an upstairs window. Tuppence drew a slow breath. Either he's fetching his Bible, or he's burning evidence. They waited until the light dimmed again. Then Tommy said softly, Tomorrow morning, we visit the vicar, officially. When dawn broke, pale and uncertain, they walked to the vicarage once more. The door was answered not by the maid this time, but by the Reverend himself, looking more haggard than ever. His eyes darted nervously between them. Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, he said, forcing a smile, you've caught me unprepared. Tuppence tilted her head. We won't keep you long, just a small matter. We were curious whether you ever received a letter marked Calix. The colour drained from his face. I don't know what you mean. Strange, Tommy said lightly, because we found one, written on vicarage paper no less. The silence stretched until it trembled. Then Holt sagged, gripping the doorframe. You must understand, he whispered. I didn't know what it meant. They told me it was for the good of the country. Who told you? Tuppence pressed. He shook his head helplessly. A man calling himself Denison. He said the parcels were harmless, that the girl was safe. God forgive me, I believed him. Tuppence's expression softened, but her tone remained steady. Then help us now, Reverend, before more harm is done. He nodded miserably. There's a meeting tonight, by the river house. That's where you'll find your answers. As they stepped back into the morning light, Tommy met his wife's gaze. So the net tightens. Tuppence smiled grimly. And we're holding the line. Behind them, the church bell began to toll, slow, mournful, like a warning echo through the mist. The wind rose that night with a restless fury, sweeping through Sutton Lee like a messenger in haste. Clouds rolled low across the moon, smothering its pale light. Every shadow seemed to breathe. The church bell towered dark against the stormy sky, its spire cutting through the mist like a finger pointing heavenward in accusation. At 11:30, two figures moved swiftly along the lane, their coats buttoned high, their footsteps muffled by the wet gravel. Tommy and Tuppence Beresford, partners in life and mischief, had chosen their hour wisely. Tuppence's voice came low and urgent. He told us to come tonight. If he's sincere, this is our last chance to learn what really happened to Lucy. Tommy nodded, his jaw set. And if he isn't sincere, Then we'll find out just what side the good Reverend's been preaching for. The vicarage loomed ahead, its windows dark except for a faint glow spilling through the study curtains. The door stood ajar, trembling slightly in the wind. "That's odd," Tuppence murmured. "He said he'd meet us privately, not leave the front door open to the world." Tommy drew her gently behind him. "Stay close." They stepped inside. The hallway smelled faintly of candle wax and damp earth, and the soft ticking of a clock echoed from somewhere deeper within. From the study came the sound of paper rustling, followed by a weary sigh. Tommy pushed open the door. Reverend Holt sat behind his desk, his face drawn and hollow, a single candle burning beside an open ledger. He looked up, and in that flicker of light his eyes seemed older, haunted. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford," he said quietly. "You came." "We don't often refuse invitations offered with such urgency," Tuppence said, slipping into a chair. "Though I must admit, you've chosen a rather dramatic hour." He gave a ghost of a smile. "There's no safety in daylight anymore. I've been watched. Even tonight I feel their eyes on this house." "Whose eyes, Reverend?" Tommy asked. Holt's hands trembled on the desk. "Lucy came to me the night before she vanished. She was terrified. Said a man had followed her from the post office to the vicarage. She thought the parcel she carried was being tracked." "Did she say why?" He shook his head slowly. "Only that she'd opened it, against instructions. She realized it contained something far too important for her to carry. She begged me to hide it, to give it to the authorities quietly. I agreed, but she never returned for it. The next morning, I found it, on the church steps, wrapped in brown paper, as if left there for me." Tuppence leaned forward. "And you opened it?" He hesitated. "Yes. I thought I should know what evil I was sheltering. Inside was a set of technical drawings, blueprints of a government communications device. I recognized the seal. I've served in clerical positions for the ministry once, long ago. I knew then what danger Lucy had stumbled into." Tommy frowned. "Blueprints stolen from Whitehall. That ties directly to Denison." Holt nodded weakly. "I tried to contact the authorities, but before I could, someone came to the house that night. I heard voices outside the gate. We lifted the vestry boards at first light," he said. "The remaining calyx drawings were there, singed, but enough to hang them all." "Then you still have them?" Tuppence asked. "Yes, but it's too late now. They know." His voice faltered. "I shouldn't have involved you. You're both in danger simply by being here." "Nonsense," Tuppence said briskly. "Danger and I have a long acquaintance. Now, this man Denison, did he ever visit you directly?" The vicar opened his mouth to answer, then froze. The window behind him shattered with a sharp, splitting crack. A bullet whined through the room, striking him squarely in the chest. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Then Holt slumped forward, the candle tipping, wax spilling across the desk. "Tommy!" Tuppence cried. He was already moving. The window gaped open to the night, the wind shrieking through. Somewhere beyond the hedges, a figure darted into the darkness. Tommy vaulted the sill and hit the ground running. The cold air knifed through his lungs as he gave chase, the path slick beneath his shoes. Ahead, the shadow wove through the churchyard, past the gravestones that loomed like sentinels. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice lost to the wind. A flash of movement, a glint of metal near the wall, and then the figure was gone, swallowed by the trees beyond the gate. Only the echo of retreating footsteps remained. Tommy stood there, chest heaving, listening. Nothing. He turned back toward the vicarage, the sound of rain returning to a steady hiss. When he re-entered the study, Tuppence was kneeling beside Holt. Her face was pale, but composed. "He's gone," she said softly. Tommy knelt beside her, taking her hand. "I couldn't reach him. He knew the grounds too well." She nodded, eyes on the fallen man. "He was frightened, Tommy, truly frightened. But he wanted to tell us more. Whoever shot him didn't just want him silenced. They wanted to make sure he couldn't name names." Tommy rose, scanning the room. "He said he hid the papers under the vestry floorboards. That's where we'll look next. But first—" He crouched by the shattered window. The curtains fluttered, torn by the bullet's path. On the sill lay a small, damp object, crushed slightly underfoot. He picked it up between his fingers, a cigarette butt. "London brand," he murmured, examining the silver ring near the filter. "Imported. Can't get these locally. Tuppence's eyes met his. Dennison. Or one of his men. She stood, smoothing her skirt, her expression grim. The Reverend was the last person who tried to do right by Lucy, and he's paid the price for it. That means we're closer than ever. Tommy nodded. Too close for their comfort. They stepped away from the body. The candle still burned on the desk, guttering weakly beside the open Bible. A single verse caught the light. Be sure your sin will find you out. Outside, the wind carried the faint toll of the church bell, though no hand touched the rope. It rang once, then again, echoing through the empty square, and in that sound the Beresfords heard the warning clear as words. Sutton Lea's secrets were done with whispering. Now they were ready to kill. Dawn came grey and grudging to Sutton Lee, seeping through the mist like light through smoke. The village still slept uneasily under the shadow of the night's violence. Word of the vicar's death had spread, whispered from doorstep to doorstep. At the Swan and Crown, the Beresfords sat opposite Inspector Craddock, the remains of an untouched breakfast cooling between them. Craddock's face was drawn. You understand, I ought to have ordered you out of this village 3 days ago. Tommy leaned back, his tone mild. But then, who'd have done your job for you, Inspector? The man's lips twitched despite himself. You're too fond of your own cleverness, Beresford. Tuppence stirred her tea. Oh, let him keep it, Inspector. It's occasionally useful. Craddock sighed. Well then, you've something for me? Tuppence nodded, sliding the photograph across the table, the one she'd found behind Lucy's drawer lining. Do you recall our elusive Mr. Dennison and the woman in pearls? I've discovered the man standing apart from them isn't just a bystander. He's Harold Vale, Mrs. Vale's son. Craddock frowned. The woman by the river house. Her son was reported dead in a shipping accident 2 years ago. Presumed dead, Tuppence corrected. But what if he wasn't? What if he became H, the very man who organised this courier network under the guise of an export business? Craddock's eyes narrowed. And Dennison? His London contact, Tommy said grimly. The handler. He's been using this quiet little parish to smuggle government material right under your nose. The inspector exhaled slowly, his gaze heavy with reluctant admiration. You've no proof. Not yet, Tuppence said, but we can make him hand us some. By afternoon, Sutton Lee hummed with quiet tension. Craddock had summoned a discreet team from the yard, hidden in the grounds near Sutton Lee Manor, the grand, decaying house that had been vacant for years, but now seemed to brood over the village like a guilty conscience. Inside, Tommy checked the concealed microphone wired beneath the mantel. If this works, Tuppence, you'll have outsmarted half the Secret Service. Not for the first time, she said dryly. Now hush, and let's review. The plan was simple, deceptively so. A local paper with Craddock's help had printed a small notice that morning. Missing girl found, statement to be given tonight at Sutton Lee Manor. Tuppence would play the part of Lucy's confidant, ready to meet the police with new information. The bait had been laid. All that remained was for the rats to come running. She stood at the window, watching the rain gather once more. Tommy, do you think he'll come? Oh, he'll come, Tommy said quietly. He's desperate. Holt's dead, the network's collapsing, and the only thing left that could damn him is Lucy's testimony, alive or otherwise. She turned to him, eyes steady. Then let's finish this. Evening fell swift and cold. The manor loomed dark against the horizon, its windows reflecting the flicker of lightning from a distant storm. Inside, a single lamp burned in the drawing room where Tuppence sat by the fire, her back straight, her expression composed. The clock struck 9. Then footsteps echoed on the gravel outside. Tommy, hidden behind the curtain near the French doors, exchanged a glance with Craddock, who crouched by the recording equipment. The door creaked open. Mr. Dennison stepped in, immaculate as ever, though the rain glistened on his hat and shoulders. His smile was a blade's edge. Mrs. Beresford, how curious to find you here, alone. Tuppence smiled faintly. You always appear when curiosity's involved, Mr. Dennison. Or, should I say, Mr. Vale's associate. His eyes flickered. You've been busy. I do my best. You see, Lucy's alive. The man froze. Alive? Dennison froze. A flicker crossed his face, the first crack in his composure. Good, Tuppence thought. He believes it, the one who paid her to carry a parcel to the vicarage. He laughed, a short, sharp sound. You're lying. Tuppence rose slowly, her tone calm. Am I? She told us how she discovered what was inside the parcel, blueprints of a government transmitter. She realized she'd been used as a courier in your little espionage game. Denison's composure cracked. You have no idea what you're meddling with. Oh, I have an excellent idea, she said softly. You and Harold Vale used the vicarage to move documents through the parish. Innocent girls like Lucy carried them, never suspecting they were betraying their own country. When she found out, you silenced her. He stepped forward, eyes burning. Where is she? Waiting, Tuppence said, ready to give her statement. For a heartbeat, silence stretched taut as wire. Then he smiled again, slowly this time, cruelly. You should have left her in peace. His hand went to his coat, but before he could draw, the door behind him burst open. Scotland Yard! Craddock's voice thundered through the room. 2 constables lunged, seizing Denison by the arms. The man struggled, then froze as he saw the small microphone gleaming beneath the mantel. Its red light blinked softly. Craddock gestured to the technician beside him. You got it? The man nodded. A crackling voice echoed from the recorder. Denison's own words, clear as confession. You and Harold Vale used the vicarage. Innocent girls like Lucy carried them. Denison sagged, the fight leaving him. You'll never prove Vale's alive. Tommy stepped forward from behind the curtain, rain still dripping from his coat. We don't need to. You've just done it for us. They took him away through the rain, handcuffed and silent. Outside, the manor grounds were slick with mud, the wind howling through the trees. But as the police cars pulled away, another engine roared to life, a small motorboat down by the river. Tommy caught the sound first. He's not alone, Craddock cursed. Vale. Tommy was already running. The boat tore from the mooring, its lanterns swinging wildly. Through the mist, a figure hunched at the wheel, a man with the same sharp profile as Mrs. Vale, older now, hardened. Stop! Tommy shouted. The engine gunned louder, slicing across the black water. Tommy leapt from the pier, landing hard on the deck just as the boat veered toward the bend. The 2 men grappled, the river churning beneath them. Vale swung with desperate strength. You fools, none of you understand. It was never about betrayal, it was survival. Tommy blocked the blow and forced him down. Tell it to the magistrate. The struggle ended with the snap of handcuffs. Several hours later, by dawn, the manor stood silent once more. Tuppence waited by the fire, her composure restored but her eyes shadowed. Tommy entered, damp and weary. It's over. Vale confessed. Everything. Denison was his link to London. They used Lucy to move the plans out of Whitehall. When she discovered it, they panicked and locked her in the old well, then left her there while they used the river house as their base. Tuppence's voice was quiet. Poor girl, he nodded. But her death won't be in vain. The documents are recovered, the network broken. She turned toward the window where the mist was lifting at last. And the village will sleep again, until the next secret comes knocking. Tommy smiled faintly. And when it does? Tuppence looked up, eyes glimmering with that familiar spark. Then I suppose we'll answer. The clock struck 6. Outside, the first light of morning touched the manor's stone walls, washing away the night's shadows. In its quiet glow, Sutton Lee seemed once again what it had always pretended to be, peaceful, ordinary, unremarkable. But the Beresfords knew better. Beneath every calm surface there is a secret waiting to surface, and a truth that never quite stays buried. The morning after the arrest broke cold and still, the kind of quiet that comes only when a storm has spent itself. Sutton Lee lay under a thin veil of mist, its rooftops pale as bone, the church spire cutting through the haze like a black needle. The villagers went about in hushed tones, shutters half-drawn, voices lowered, as though afraid the wind might carry gossip to the dead. By noon the constables had gathered by the old well behind the churchyard, its stone rims slick with moss and age. The Reverend Holt's death had driven them there, the last thread of his confession pointing to that forgotten corner of ground. Tuppence and Tommy stood side by side as Craddock gave the order. "Lower it gently," he said. The rope creaked, the pulley groaned, and then, out of the depths, A dark, sodden shape broke the surface, limp and pale beneath the ropes. The murmurs of the onlookers fell away. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Tommy turned aside, his jaw tightening. Tuppence stood still, her face pale but composed, her gloved hands clasped before her. She had known, ever since Denison's confession, that Lucy would not be found alive. But the sight of the poor girl, her hair still tangled with riverweed, her face softened by the shadows of the water, struck like a physical blow. Craddock removed his hat. "Lucy Hargreaves," he said quietly. "No doubt now." A murmur of prayer passed among the policemen. Somewhere near the gate, a woman sobbed, a thin, trembling sound that echoed across the churchyard. Mrs. Hargreaves had arrived, clutching a shawl around her shoulders. She stumbled forward, and Tuppence caught her gently. "She's home now," Tuppence whispered. "She can rest." The mother's voice broke. She was such a good girl, always helping everyone, running errands for the vicar, the post, the shop, and none of us saw what danger she was in. Tuppence held her until the sobs subsided. "Sometimes," she said softly, "it's the kind ones who see the world most clearly." Craddock's men carried the stretcher through the gate, heads bowed. As they passed, the villagers removed their caps. The toll of the church bell followed, slow, steady, final. By afternoon, Sutton Lee was full of uneasy repentance. People who had whispered about Lucy being a runaway now whispered about their shame instead. The postmaster shut the shop early. The grocer sent flowers to the cottage. Even the vicarage, draped now in mourning black, seemed to hang its windows like eyes half-lidded in regret. At the Swan and Crown, the Beresfords and Inspector Craddock gathered once more by the fire. The flames threw long shadows across the table, and the rain drummed faintly on the roof outside. Craddock rubbed his brow. "It's done, then. Vale and Denison will hang, the rest of the network's being rounded up in London as we speak. The girl's testimony, even from the grave, was enough." Tommy gave a short nod. A tidy end to a nasty business. Tuppence said nothing for a moment. She was staring into the fire where the embers pulsed like sleeping hearts. "Not tidy, Tommy. Necessary. There's a difference." Craddock leaned back, watching her thoughtfully. "You know, Mrs. Beresford, you've the instincts of a detective and the heart of a crusader. If it weren't for you, this would still be written off as a missing person." Tuppence smiled faintly. "I prefer to think of it as listening. Villagers have a way of telling the truth, if you stand still long enough." Craddock's expression softened. "Mrs. Vale's statement confirms what we suspected. Miss Calthorpe has given evidence as well," Craddock added. Denison pressed her to slip envelopes through the vicar's outgoing post. She refused, and kept silent out of fear. Her son blackmailed her into silence. She knew Lucy had been brought to the river house, but was too frightened to speak. Said she heard the crying at night, but told herself it was the wind. "People tell themselves many things," Tommy murmured, "especially when they need to sleep." Craddock rose, pulling on his coat. "I'll be heading to London at first light. There's a commendation in this for you both, you know." Tuppence looked up. "We didn't do it for that." "I know." He gave them a small, sincere smile. "But sometimes the yard does like to say thank you properly." When he had gone, silence settled again. The fire crackled, and outside the rain had ceased. Tommy poured them each a glass of sherry. "Here's to Lucy," he said quietly, "the bravest errand girl in England." Tuppence raised her glass, but didn't drink. "She never meant to be brave," she said. "She was just doing her job, delivering what she thought was an ordinary parcel. And in the end, she delivered the truth." Tommy nodded. "Even at the cost of her life." For a moment, neither spoke. The world outside the window had turned soft and silver, the mist rising once more from the river. Somewhere in the distance, the faint call of an owl broke the stillness. 2 days later, the well was sealed. The masons came early, laying fresh stones over the mouth and setting a small brass plaque in place. It read simply, "In memory of Lucy Hargreaves, faithful in small things." The villagers watched from a distance. Mrs. Hargreaves stood with Tuppence at her side, her hands clasped, her face drawn but peaceful. "She would have liked you," she said quietly. "You have her kind of courage." Tuppence smiled, blinking back the sudden sting in her eyes. "I only followed where she led." As the final stone settled, a hush fell over the churchyard. The river murmured softly beyond the trees, its waters running clear again after the storm. Tommy joined her as the crowd dispersed. Strange thing, isn't it? How evil can hide in the most ordinary places. A vicarage, a cottage, a well. Tuppence nodded. And how courage can, too. They walked together toward the lane, the gravel crunching beneath their shoes. The afternoon light broke at last through the clouds, gilding the rooftops and the distant spire. Sutton Lee would heal, in time. The gossip would fade, the houses would repaint their doors, the gardens would bloom again. But something indefinable had changed. The village, once content in its smallness, now carried the weight of its secrets like a shadow at dusk. As they reached the gate, Tuppence turned for one last look at the sealed well. "Do you know, Tommy," she said softly, "I think the world runs on errands, small ones that seem unimportant until they change everything." He smiled, taking her hand. "Then we'd better be ready for the next one." They walked on together, the sound of their steps fading into the quiet rhythm of the village. Behind them, the brass plaque caught the light of the dying sun, shining softly, like truth finally brought to the surface, and the air of Sutton Lee, though still and peaceful once more, would never be quite the same. The rain had returned, soft, civilized rain this time, the kind that tapped politely at the window panes instead of battering them. The lamps in the Beresfords' sitting room burned low, filling the room with that golden, familiar glow that made even the gloomiest day feel somehow well-mannered. Tommy stood by the mantel, coaxing the kettle to a boil, while Tuppence sat curled on the sofa beneath a tartan rug, her knitting idle in her lap. Between them, on the low table, lay a neat pile of newspapers. Sutton Lee's name appeared on each one, though the headlines grew smaller with every edition. "Imagine," Tommy said, pouring hot water into the pot with the ceremony of a priest at communion. "One little errand girl, one missing parcel, and we end up unravelling a nest of spies. Makes the whole business sound positively overblown." Tuppence smiled faintly. "You do make it sound simple, darling. It was rather less straightforward when bullets were flying through the vicar's window." "Ah, yes," he said, taking his seat beside her. "That part was less restful. I still have the bruise to prove it." "Consider it your decoration for bravery," he grinned. "I'll trade it for a second scone." She passed him the plate automatically, but her gaze drifted toward the rain-slicked window. "It's strange, isn't it? We never set out to find these things. We go for a quiet weekend, a little country air, and somehow someone ends up shot, drowned, or unmasked as a traitor." Tommy stirred his tea. "You think it's us, then? Some sort of bad luck magnet for misdeeds?" "Not bad luck," she said softly. "Just inevitable. Mysteries seem to find us, Tommy, as if they know we can't help but meddle." He gave a mock sigh. "Meddling is in your blood. I'm merely the loyal accomplice." Tuppence reached across for her cup, smiling over the rim. "And a very good one, too, though I must say it's getting harder to pretend we're retired." "Well," he said, "if retirement means sitting about waiting for the next villain to pop out from behind the umbrella stand, I dare say we're model pensioners." She laughed, a soft, warm sound that curled around the edges of the room like smoke from a good fire. "You're impossible." "That's what keeps you interested." The clock on the mantel chimed 5, each note deliberate, polite. A moment later came a knock at the door. 3 brisk raps. Tommy rose. "If that's another mystery, I'm telling them we're closed for business until Tuesday." But it was only the post. The maid handed him a single envelope, thick and official-looking, addressed in a firm, familiar hand. "Inspector Craddock," Tommy said, glancing at the seal. "He does love a bit of ceremony." Tuppence gestured. "Read it aloud. Perhaps he's inviting us to his wedding. I hear he's terribly fond of scolding women." Tommy unfolded the letter. The paper smelled faintly of tobacco and office ink. "My dear Beresfords, I've just returned from London, where the department has concluded its investigation. The espionage ring has been completely dismantled. The documents are secure, and the government expresses sincere gratitude for your assistance, though they would rather die than admit 2 civilians solved what their own men missed. Lucy Hargreaves is to be buried tomorrow with full honours under special commendation. Her name will be cleared officially, though the details will never be made public. Such is the curse of true service, unseen, unrecorded, yet essential. I thought you would want to know. Yours sincerely, Inspector Craddock." Tommy lowered the letter slowly. "Full honours. That's something at least. Tuppence's expression softened. She deserved them. Poor Lucy, she never knew she was delivering more than a parcel. She delivered the truth, even when no one wanted it. Tommy nodded, and paid for it. They sat for a moment in silence, listening to the steady patter of rain. Somewhere outside, a taxi hummed past, its headlights slicing briefly through the gloom. Tuppence reached for the teapot. "To Lucy," she said quietly, lifting her cup. Tommy raised his own. "To errand girls and ordinary courage," she added, with that bright spark in her eye, "and to tea before danger." They clinked their cups gently, the porcelain ringing like a small private bell. The fire had burned low by the time the conversation faded into contented quiet. Tuppence resumed her knitting, Tommy dozed over a newspaper, and the world beyond the window settled back into its calm, rain-drenched rhythm. For the first time in days, Sutton Lee seemed far away, a story already closing. Then came the sound, a soft rustle. Tuppence glanced up. An envelope had just slid through the letter slot, landing neatly on the rug. No postmark, no name on the front, only a single line in black ink, private and confidential. She met Tommy's eyes across the lamplight. He groaned. No peace for the wicked or the inquisitive. Tuppence leaned forward, the faintest smile curving her lips. "Well, my dear, we can't let the kettle go to waste." Tommy sighed, already reaching for the envelope. "And so begins another perfectly dreadful adventure." Outside, the rain whispered on, patient and steady, as though it knew the Beresfords' quiet was never built to last. And inside their little sitting room, with tea steaming and secrets waiting at their feet, the next mystery had already arrived.